What is going on, guys? It is Murderink here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Today we're going to be talking about probably the most asked question in Raid. I'm going to answer that for you and hopefully give you a guide to be able to use pretty much for the rest of the duration while you're playing this game. So that particular question is, should I book this champion? It doesn't matter which champion it is, and I've seen a lot of videos where they have, you must book these champions, don't waste your books on these champions. It's a lot easier than that, and I can just make one video and give you the guidelines on how to know if you can book each and every single champion by following a few simple rules and basic knowledge on how skill ups work. With all of that being said, I'm going to use a few examples of champions some people use, some people don't, just so you can kind of get some interaction and understand where the value actually comes from as far as booking your champions. So we're going to take a look at Skull Lord Vargal first as an example. And the first thing you have to do whenever you get a champion, if you ever ask yourself, should I be booking this champion? Think about exactly where you're using that champion and will the books have an impact on what you're doing? If I'm using Skull Lord Vargal in the arena and I get my provoke off, I have him very quick, and I notice quite often that his cooldown still has 1 or 2 rounds before it's available when I really could use this to my advantage. If that's the case, then 100% I'm going to book and aim for this skill right here. Second example would be if I notice that my entire arena team will fall apart if provoke doesn't land. This bringing it to 100% is a clear indicator that he is a champion that needs to be booked. Outside of that, the same thing will apply to his A3 here. If I want the highest possible chance of this landing, and if it doesn't land, I'll probably lose, I'd rather stick with the RNG of accuracy versus resistance instead of this skill having a 25% chance, unless you go the support tree route, to not land on the enemies. So that would be step 1 for booking any single champion in this game. You have to think about where you're using the champion. If it's arena, go through some arena matches, say, okay, if this was booked, this would happen, and see what happens over 10 or 15 rounds. And that's a good way to determine, especially for arena, if it's going to be worth it. If you're looking at something like dungeons, saying, will this champion improve the quality of my dungeons? You have to do the same exact thing. If you're reducing a cooldown on a champion, it doesn't matter who it is, we can even use Razin as an example, and he's decreasing the turn meter of everybody. You have to really break it down and say, is this going to be worth it from a 7 turn cooldown to a 6 turn cooldown? The answer is 99.99% going to be no. However, maybe if you're building a specific farming team with 100% win rate and this needs to be on a 6 turn cooldown, this would actually be worth booking. But don't just look at the long cooldown and say, this doesn't matter. If this comes up for a certain wave, even at the boss of any single dungeon, and it has to be turn 6 when booked, that would increase the value of his A3 and would actually make this champion worth booking. So there's a lot that goes into booking. It's not as easy as book these champions, don't book these champions. It's a really harmful thing to do for any single player because, as we've mentioned before, there is no single champion content in this entire game. Everything is 4-man, everything is 5-man, so you can't just say always book this champion, always book that champion. It's going to be different from every single player based on what their account has and where they are progression wise. So now let's look at a really good example of a champion like our Mountain King here. Mountain King, his sole purpose is being in a shield set with 163,000 health, giving that shield to my team for arena, for faction wars, so none of his damage really matters. So what did I do? I didn't book him at all. It doesn't matter if this is at a 5 turn or a 4 turn cooldown, it doesn't matter if this one's at a 4 or 5 turn cooldown either. So this is a key takeaway here. This is a really good way for you to save lots of time and money if you are spending money on books, to know exactly which champions you are going to book. Now I do have a second Mountain King, and this Mountain King is in fact fully booked. Now why did I fully book him? This is someone I was using in Clan Boss, this is someone I was using in Arena, but I was building him full damage. That is the huge difference and why you can't just say, don't book this champion or book this champion, because it really depends on where you're going to use him. I found lots of value for increasing the cooldown, not so much on the A1. As we all know, the damage increases of these abilities aren't as big as people think, so don't be too drawn in saying, wow, this is 25% damage. That's not how the damage works, and it's not as big as you think, so definitely keep that in mind. Cooldowns, increasing the percent of landing abilities, those are the huge takeaways that you can ever look for as far as a skill up and understanding what the champion does. Now that I've gone over some legendaries, let's go over someone who's a login reward, that is High Katun. Now High Katun, everyone would say, okay, she's a speed booster, really good for the early game, most people are going to use her. However, this is not a champion that I would book. Attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of decreasing the turn meter by 15%. Now, as we know from any arena team, unless you're going second, now this is a champion where I had extra books, so I said, why not? I had considered using her in a clan boss team, and I'm pretty sure I did with this A2 here, so I had to book that, but outside of that, if I was booking this champion strictly for arena, I would put 0 books into this champion because it would be a waste for me. If the sole purpose of my team is to go first, it doesn't matter if this is a 3-turn or a 4-turn cooldown. If I'm not going first and the other team's going first, they are going to win. It's the same point with this A3 here. This takes a lot of books. This takes 5 books to max the A3. While attacking all enemies and decreasing the turn meter by 15% is rather huge, this isn't going to make or break an arena setting. Now if you want to go to dungeons, you have to do the same thing I talked about with Razin. Is using this AoE every 5 turns compared to every 4 turns impactful for your runs and your progression? Is having a 50% chance as opposed to a 75% chance more impactful for your progression? That's what it's all going to come down to. It has nothing to do with how the champion's rated, how the champion's not rated based on tier lists, because champions are as good as the surrounding champions you put on that team. There is no real tier list because you can make every single champion work simply with synergy, knowing how the kits work, and knowing how the other kits work, as well as what content you're doing rather well. Now there are definitely interesting champions that I'm going to go over next that can definitely make you question whether or not it's worth it. So Breckis is one of those champions that requires a lot of books, and people ask me all the time, is he worth the books? Is he worth the books? Now this is the huge takeaway here. We have a double chance of reducing the cooldown, so we are reducing a cooldown by 2. We're also increasing a 75% chance to a 100% chance. We're looking at an A3 here now. We're reducing that cooldown by 1. We're making a 50% chance, a 75% chance, and the A1 we're just doing additional damage. So this is the only champion, and there are a few like it, but there really aren't that many, where I would say this is where you really have to think. Changing something from a 5-turn to a 3-turn cooldown isn't as big as people think. However, the longer the battles are, the more cooldown matters. What I mean by that is I've used Breckis in countless amounts of clan boss teams, and that's really important to consider. Cooldown means much more in a clan boss team than it will in any single dungeon or any arena matchup. Because while those matches typically last for 1 minute to 2 minutes, or 10 or 15 seconds as far as arena goes, clan boss can last up to 15 or 30 minutes if you decide to manual it. So thinking about how many chances Breckis is actually going to get a turn, calculating this 3-turn cooldown versus a 5-turn cooldown, on top of this hitting an enemy 6 times, that's another factor you have to play into this champion. This is where he really shines and why this champion is worth booking as far as his A2 goes. So there are definitely nuanced champions like that. You have to be very careful before you easily dismiss them saying, this is just way too many books, it's not going to be worth it. The damage swing for having this champion booked and not booked is actually night and day based on the cooldown drop. Now the last champion that I want to talk out is in fact Tormund the Cold. This is a champion that has a very unique passive. He's probably in his own level as far as how annoying he is. So this is where you can really use this to your advantage, and this is another, I guess, outlier as far as booking a champion goes. All of his percentages will never equal to 100%. With that being said, what you're doing when you book this champion is, you're making it so you have a higher percent chance of freezing your enemy. If you're relying on freezing your enemy to win, you're giving yourself a higher success rate. So while I don't want to talk about this champion too much since it's really just him, and there's not many other champions like him, this is something you consider with other champions that have crowd control skills that aren't 100% chance. If you're relying on that to win, if you want to increase your win rate, obviously the answer would be to book the champion, increase the chance it has to land, and move on from there. So with all of this RNG in mind, the only other thing to talk about when booking is don't forget about the gear sets you have at your disposal. So now if you're doing content like dungeons, or you're using a speed team and you're not using a speed tune team, and there's a champion you have and you're really counting on a cooldown to always be up, you can use sets like Relentless. You can also use sets like Reflex Gear to reduce those cooldowns by using a gear set and not really having to worry about booking a champion. While it's not going to be 100% consistent, it's only going to be a chance to happen. Still, that small chance is better than nothing. And even if you think about it, especially with Relentless Gear, you have an 18% chance of getting an extra turn. So you have a chance to reduce your cooldown by 18%, and especially in progression settings where you're working hard to reach a goal here, most times you're not going to have a 100% success rate when you're trying to progress through content. Now with that being said, all you want to do is increase your chances enough to where you can get through something, then focus on the gear to making it a 100% win rate over time. So if you have a counterattack champion and you have another champion who really needs books, specifically Martyr, since there is a Martyr event out at the moment, and you're thinking to yourself, Martyr would be good for clan boss, but I can also really use Martyr since she's really strong in pretty much every single type of progression outside of this game, including arena. Since she hits so hard, you can use a set like Relentless to your advantage, sacrifice a speed tune team, go with a speed clan boss team, and be able to use Martyr unbooked everywhere, with that chance of Relentless Gear reducing the cooldown and overall increasing your success rate on all levels of progression. Alright guys, that was my video on which champions to book, which champions not to book. Less about that, more about the methodology that I would use on booking every single champion to make sure you're using this resource to your advantage. Books are very expensive and they're hard to get. I would like to see a change in that, but until they do that, this information is very important for you to know as the player, so you're not basing things off of a tier list or champions being considered good or considered bad. Make sure you have the ability to read the description of the skill in question, think about where you're using that champion, then use that information to make the best guided decision possible, making sure you're progressing as efficiently as possible. As always, thanks a bunch for watching this video. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and I will see you all in my next upload.